Hi there, my name is Kevin and welcome to my channel where we learn how to make the web and how to make it look good while we're at it with weekly tips, tricks, and tutorials. And in this week's video, I'm doing something really exciting. I'm building out a to-do list and we're going to be styling it up and making it look really, really awesome. But even more special is I'm not just styling this up and making it look cool. I've gotten in touch with Kyle of WebDev Simplified and he's going to actually make this thing work. So in this video, we're going to be looking at how to do the HTML and the CSS and just make this thing look really, really cool. We're going to be doing a lot of really fun and cool things in this, which is why the video is a little bit longer than I usually do. So here is what we're going to be building. It is the stuff I need to do task list, to-do list, little mini app here, which is going to be a to-do builder, but we're not just doing the to-do itself, we're also going to be able to create extra lists. So here I have two different lists going on. So you can see I have one of my other jobs to do is create a new task. Let's go and do that. So if I come in here, here is my new task. And if I can push enter and it makes my new one, or yet another task, and I can also push this little plus symbol and it will make my new task. And now this one's finished, so I can click on that to scratch it off and say that it's done. You'll also see it's keeping track of how many tasks we have to do. So if I click that on or off, it has a little animation going on there to do that. And I can come here and I can clear completed tasks, or if the whole list is done, or even if it's not, I can delete an entire list. You can also come here and let's say you have your work list and a groceries, let's just do grocery list. They're like that. And if I click on it, it gets bold because it's active. And then I need apples and a pineapple and some charcoal for my barbecue. Charcoal. And so in this one, we're going to be doing the HTML and CSS. And you want to see how to actually make it work, you can go and check out Kyle's channel. Kyle has a lot of really high quality and awesome stuff. Also, if you're interested in what I do, you'll definitely be interested in his type of content as well. He does a lot more JavaScript and functional stuff. So I know I've just done my intersection observer videos here, but if you're into JavaScript, and a lot of you guys seem to be asking for more JavaScript content. So if you really want to start getting into JavaScript and seeing some fun JavaScript stuff you can do, I'd highly recommend checking out his channel. But he also does some really fun HTML and CSS stuff along the way as well. So yeah, link to that is in the description and the link to the next video is in there. But before you go and click on that, make sure you watch this one. Let's get into it. All right, it's time to write some HTML, and I'm going to try and do this as quickly as I can, but the basic structure of it is pretty simple, but there will be a timestamp down below that goes to my CSS, just in case it does drag out a little bit, because sometimes writing markup can take a little bit. So what we pretty much want here is, here's where we are, but I'm going to be using this as my reference as I'm creating it. So I pretty much want a div for this, and a separate div that's going to be all of this over here. So that's going to be my all tasks, and I'm using Emmet right now. So if I do .all tasks and I push tab, it will give me my div like that. If you're using VS Code, you have Emmet already, you can start using it out of the box. If you're not using VS Code, you can definitely get an extension for your editor and then you'll be all good. So we're gonna have all tasks and I'm gonna have to-do list. So that is the basic structure, very basic structure. And now let's go into my all tasks and get this all set up. It's relatively simple. The most complicated part is our little create a little form down there, but it's not that bad. So the first thing I'm gonna do is an H2, and I'm gonna call this task list title. That will just be my list, and then we can come down and we want a UL because it's an unordered list that we'll just call task list because I think that's a nice simple one. And then we need 3 list items. One of these list items we're also going to give the class is active. We'll call it active list. So we know which one of these is the active, and that's the bold that we'll be putting and can move around. So let's do the same thing I have right now. YouTube work and grocery. There we go. So save that. Let's come back over here just to make sure that it's working, and we can see that we have a really basic list right there. Now I'm going to be still inside of my all tasks here, and what we want is we want to be able to create this little input that's Kyle's going to take whatever we put in there and actually make a new list item out of. So to do that, it's going to be pretty simple, but we will need a form. I don't know exactly what Kyle wants to do with this form, so I'm just going to leave it like that. And inside my form here, I'm going to put an input. Now, this input will be a type text, but what we also need is some other stuff on here. And just to make it easier for you guys to read, I'm going to come down and make it look like this, just so it's going to be easier to follow, because we're going to put a few different attributes on here. So the type is text. The class is going to be new, and I'm going to do a new list like this, and we'll see why after. I normally use BEM for my naming convention, but I'm just going to be playing around with something a little bit different in this. You'll know, if you're used to my videos, you'll know this isn't usually how I name stuff, but it's fun to experiment and try different naming conventions sometimes. So we're going to have my new list like that. And then let's come down and say, I want a placeholder on here. So placeholder is going to be new list name, obviously. But the other thing that I also want on here is an area label. Because I'm putting an input in here and I'm not actually going to be putting in a label, which is best practice. You should try and put in a label, but in my design, I didn't have it. Being a naughty designer, I want to come in here and at least have an area label because we want to keep it as accessible as possible. So a screen reader will know what the purpose of this input here is. So my area label, and on here we'll throw in a new list name as well. So it'd be the same as my placeholder in this case. So I can save that. And then the other thing we need on here is a button. I'm going to give this class a button. I'm going to give it two classes. We're going to call it button and list as well. Now, you know, this has the class of new and list, and this is a class of button list. That's all good and dandy because of how I'm going to set this up. Again, this is not a conventional way of doing naming, but I wanted to experiment a little bit with this one as well. So for this button, I'm actually just going to put the plus symbol in there. So we could also on here come in and put an area label of create new list. Like that, so at least, you know, if somebody gets the plus symbol, they might not know exactly what it's for, even though visually it might let them know. Cool, so that is all set up. So if we come and look, I mean, it's not even that far off of what we have here. So we're getting there. So now that is there, now we can actually come into our to-do list here and get this looking pretty good. So you'll notice there's two parts to this, and there's actually three. We're going to have our header at the top, we're going to have a div for our to-do lists, and then we're going to have this part at the bottom, which is essentially the same thing that we just created here, and then we're going to have two buttons that are dangling off the bottom of this. So in here we can do my to-do header. And in my to-do header, we have two things. We have a name and we have our tasks here. So I'm going to do an h2 with a class of list title, and for now we'll just put YouTube, so when we look at it after and we're styling it, we have something to look at. And then I'm gonna have a paragraph with a task count on there, and for now that can be 3 tasks remaining. So if we come back to here, there we go, I have my YouTube, my 3 tasks remaining right there. Perfecto. So let's come down and keep going. So actually we can get out of my to-do header here, and we want to come into the next part. So in here, I'm going to make my .todo body because this is the main section. And this is going to be one div. We're going to have another part for that, and we're going to have another part down here for my clear completed tasks and delete list. So for that, our 3 parts, we can call the first one tasks. We can call the second one can be our new task creator. And then the third one will be delete stuff, because why not? We know we're deleting, not the best name. We could probably get a little better with that. I do think it is descriptive enough in a small little thing like this that we'll know what it's for. So in my tasks, let's start with my tasks. So we want to come inside of here, and we're going to create a task. So each individual task will be in a div, because we're going to be using flex a little bit, and we have to position things within all of this, and it gets a little bit interesting. And this is where things do get a little bit interesting, because if you've ever tried to style a checkbox, you know you can't really get them to look like that. So to be able to do that, well, first we still do want to have a checkbox on here. So I'm going to do a input, but it will be a checkbox. And like before, I'm actually going to bring this down onto its own line just to make it a little bit easier for everybody to see what's going on. So we have my type checkbox, and then inside of we also want to give this an ID. So ID will be task 1. And then we also want to have a label. So label 4 will be obviously for task 1. So if you're not sure what the point of a label is, let's just say it's record to-do list video. So if I come and look over here, say I don't have my 4, so if I just have a label like that, and I come and click here, nothing happens. I have a checkbox that I have to click on there. But if a label is set up and you have an ID and the 4 are the same thing, when you click on this, it actually will check your checkbox. And this is the same for any sort of input. So if it's a checkbox, a radio button, anything like that, maybe on desktop, it's not the most important thing in the world, even though it is a good practice, but it is really useful to do this on mobile, because you have fat fingers. Sometimes it's hard to click in a little box, so you can click anywhere and it will work. You can also put an input inside a label, but because of how I'm going to be setting this up, I think it might get in our way. Now to do the custom checkbox here, we can't style this to be a circle and to give it the different colors and all of that. So I'm actually going to create a span in here. Span class is equal to custom checkbox. Now, normally I don't like having empty spans like this just for styling content. I'm going to do it now. We could use a pseudo-element for it, but I think this is just going to be a bit more evident. I like having a class name on this to say exactly what it's for and what it's doing. And that's my task 1. So just for now, we only have one thing here. So I am just going to copy this whole thing, task. And also, to make my life easier, let's comment this. Close task 1. And we can copy my whole task. Okay, there we go. So I've just come through and created 3 tasks here. So we have my 3 tasks that are all working. I've set up manually for now the IDs and the 4 on this, but Kyle will make it so that automatically happens, so you don't have to worry. I just want to do it like this now for styling purposes to make sure that it looks good with more than one task in there, because you could always style something up and it looks fine with one, but then as you start adding more stuff, it doesn't look so fantastic. Now we need to recreate this here pretty much. So actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to come up to where we created that, where I have this form here. I'm going to copy that whole form, and I'm going to come and drop that form inside my new task creator over here, like that. The only thing is, instead of having new list name, so we can come list name here will be new task name. And this on my area label, create new task. And my button here will be button task. So all of that will be changed. My class is a little bit different on the button because you can see the colors of them are different. And last but not least, now we can come down here to my delete stuff. And in here I need 2 buttons. So let's just do button times 2. And on both of these buttons, we'll give them a class of btn, and we'll just call it delete. And in here we can say, actually these aren't the same, so we'll have clear completed tasks as my first button, and my second button here will be delete list. So if we come and look, so everything is now in place, and now it's time to start styling it and doing some fun stuff with it. So let's jump over to my CSS file. Now you'll notice this is an SCSS file. I'm going to be writing regular CSS here. It's just because of the way I have my build set up, it automatically will compile my SCSS and update the browser when I'm working in an SCSS file. But there's nothing SCSS that will be going on in this video. So the very first thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to come here on my body, and again, if you haven't used custom properties, you'll probably be able to follow along pretty easily. But if you do want to watch the video on those that I have, you can. So here my background color will be my var color primary. So that's going to take the color that I had up there, and it's going to set that as my background. And then my color itself will be var color light. All right, so that's looking pretty good. So the next thing we do is a display of grid. And let's go and look at what I want this grid to look like. And you could probably set this up with flexbox, but the easiest way to do it would be to have a parent on here to just do a display flex. And then you'd have to set widths on these or some flex bases and play around with stuff. Whereas I like grid because I find you write less code with it in general. And putting it on the body, what I'm going to do is one row here, which will go all the way across, and then my second row will be split up into a few different things. So to do that, I'm going to be using the grid shorthand because it's the fastest way to do it. Again, this could all be on one line, but I'm just going to do it on multiple lines so you can see exactly what I'm doing. And I'm going to do something like this, and I'll explain what this is. So basically I'm saying this is my first row in my grid, and my row is going to be split into 4 columns, and all of those columns are going to be used for my header. So I'm saying the first row of my content will just be all used for my header like that. And the height of that row will be auto, which means just fit the content that's inside of it. Now my second row is going to be blank. You could do this, usually you'll see demos where they just put in one dot like this, but I just like doing dots all the way across because it helps balance it out a little bit so you can really visualize what each column is. The second column here will be lists because it's my main lists. The next one will be my active because it's my active list. And then the last one will be, again, blank. So this here, this empty space here, and this empty space here are this and this, these blank areas. And once again, the height can be auto. So I've defined my 2 rows of content. And now what I'm going to do is a /, and now I can define what the columns are. So I've said this is my row, which will be made up of 4 headers, or my header goes all the way across. And then this is my next row, which has my lists and my active. Now, how big is each one of these columns as we look down at it? So the first column, I'm just going to do 1FR, which is a fraction, which is just pretty much use the available space. It's one of my favorite things with grid. And the other is min-max. So min-max, min-max, and 1FR. So the FR is just whatever available space, whatever is left over, just throw into the 2 sides here. And because they're both set up to be 1, they should be equal spacing. Min-max lets you have a minimum maximum size on something. Another one of my favorite things with grid. So I'm going to say the minimum here is 100 pixels and the maximum on here is 300. And on this one here, I'm going to say the minimum is 250 pixels and the maximum is 500 pixels. This isn't going to be completely responsive. I'm not going to do it for mobile devices where they should probably stack one on top of each other. You could always put this inside of a media query or something if you really wanted to push it to that level. So if we look at what we have now, it's looking like that. But when I save this, everything should get all screwy with because it doesn't know where to place these things on the grid. And this is where the real magic of grid comes in. So I had my title. I had my all tasks, and I had my to-do list. So those were the 3 divs the 3 like parent divs pretty much that we have on there. And my title is just my title. So my title, I'm going to say grid area is header. And when I save that, you're going to see right away it goes and takes up that whole top area. My all tasks here. So this is my list. This is this part right on the left. This one has a grid area of lists. And then my to-do list here has a grid area of active because it's the active list. So now when we check out what's happening there, now you can start seeing it is getting placed on the grid like I want. And if we want to visualize the grid a little bit in Firefox, if you're using Firefox, you have under layout, once you have a grid, you can either click and toggle it on and off here, or you can come in the side here and toggle it off in the layout section. So if I put that on, you can now see it's broken it up. Now these numbers are all the numbers for my list. Let's change the color of this. All right, I think that's a bit easier to see. So we have header, header, header. So you can see that my header is taking up all this space. This is blank. There's nothing in there because I use my dots. Here's my list, my active box, and then that other one there. And because we did set that up with a min-max, they will grow and shrink, but they have maximum sizes on them. So they'll never get bigger than the 100 pixels and they'll never get bigger than 300 and 500 pixels respectively. So if you are using grid, strongly recommend that you do use Firefox as your developing browser. Great, so that is pretty much done for my body and how all that is set up. Now my header is looking pretty good, but I do want it to look a little bit nicer, so let's come in here on my title and set that up a little bit nicer. So the text align, we can just do a text align of center on there. Font size, let's make it bigger. I'm going to do a calc because I'm going to use a viewport. Let's try 7 viewport width. Plus, say, like 2 rem. So the 2 rem sets a minimum size on it. It can never be smaller than that, but it can definitely get bigger. I think my font weight, I actually want it to be 900 instead of 700. There we go. And I'm just going to do a color of RGBA 000.1. I don't know. I want it to be pretty light. There's this one annoying thing with a font is if it's overlapping and you do have a lower opacity on it, you'll see it overlaps and you see that. So let's just add a little bit of letter spacing of like 1 pixel. There we go. So that goes away. So with this 7 viewport width, if my screen gets bigger, it will grow with my screen. But if my screen gets smaller, it will shrink. But just using viewport units means if you're on a really small device, that font can get uber small, like insanely small. So A, I wouldn't do this if it wasn't a really big title, and B, so body text, please don't do that. And if you are setting it up for a really big title, this you'd probably be safe anyway, but by putting it in a calc, you're sort of giving yourself some safety room or a safety net there to make sure the font size never gets too small that you can't read it. From an accessibility point of view, too small that you can't read it, I did put this at super low opacity, which makes it really hard to read. But anyway, yeah. I do want it to be up higher on the screen too, so let's do a margin on this of, I don't know, negative 0.5 em, 0, and 0.5 em or something, just to keep some space. That's too much. 0.2. I sort of want, yeah, that's pretty good. I want it almost stuck to the top. Maybe that could even be a 0.3. There we go. So for my alt tasks, I don't think we have any extra styling we want to do in there. It's just setting up everything where we want it to be. But so we can come down here and so let's set up our task list. So for my task list itself, let's see, I'm going to start with just the line height on here of like a 1.7 or something to space them out because they're really closely stuck together. So just to visually space them out. And again, this task list is the UL itself here. So you could go onto the LIs and use margins on those, but yeah, instead of having to also style the LIs, this will work. And even if it ends up being multiple lines, I don't think it'd be too bad. I'm also going to play with the padding a little bit just because I find it sticking out. I don't really like where it's positioned, and the font size could be smaller because this is a little bit less important than what we're doing over here. So the font size on here, let's switch that down, font size to like 1.2 rem. If you, just so we know, on the body itself, I have put a font size of 1.5 rem. So the font size will be a little bit smaller for my task list here. If you're not sure why I'm using rems sometimes and I'm using ems for other things like my margin here, I do have 2 videos actually where I explore that. So you can always check those out. There'll be a link to those in the description below. So there, that will look a little bit nicer. Now the bullet I find is kind of too much, so let's change the list style to list style to circle in circle. I always spell circle wrong. It's weird. Just to make it, I want to still have that it's a bullet list. I don't feel like custom, we could put in a custom image or something, but I think that works just fine. And we want our active list to be a font weight of 700. So it'll be a bold and stand out a little bit more. I'm not doing 900, which I also had. That's what I'm using up here. Just because it's so bold and it's a smaller font size, it could actually make it a little bit harder to read. If you do have a really bold font size on text, try also increasing the letter spacing just by like 1 pixel. It will make it easier to read because sometimes what happens with this really bold text on small font sizes is they start getting stuck together a little bit because even in this E, like the shapes and things start disappearing a little bit, so it just helps raise readability. And I think I mentioned I want to change the spacing a little, so the padding left, let's try like 1.1. There we go. To move it over, it sort of lines everything up. Instead of having that giant indent, it just sort of cleans things up a little bit like that. Overall, I think that is looking pretty good, but now we want to style this, and these are both going to sort of get styled at the same time because they almost have the same name. I have this one as, this input is my new list, and this one over here is the new task. So what I'm going to do is all task list. So here I'm going to have my new. So if something is just new, which is both of these, I maybe should have done new input. That name by itself is sort of bothering me a little bit. But anyway, we're going to stick with it because it's what I decided on. The very first thing I'm going to do is background on these will be transparent, just so the background on it disappears. I'm going to do a border of 0, which will remove the border. And we're going to add a border bottom back in. So border bottom on these will be 1 pixel solid. And I'm going to put in current color. And on the color here, color will be inherit. Is that going to work? Perfect. So by default, they were just sticking with black. So I'm inheriting my white color here. And then this border bottom is the current color is going to always be the color of the text. So if the color here changes, so if we just change this to pink, that bottom changes along with it. So that means when I change the colors here, everything over here should change right away. Let's fix the font size on here. So font size will be inherit like that. So it's going to grab the same font size we had and that we were using everywhere else. Now one thing in Firefox here, I'm not getting it, but you get that blue glow, and that blue glow as an outline that's not going to show up pretty much even in Chrome because of the blue background we have here. So I'm actually going to do something here that I wouldn't normally encourage, but outline of none. Now, this is generally considered really bad practice because we want a visual indicator when something is clicked in, because someone might be going by tab. And when you tab in, I know you get your little flashing icon, but now this is selected. So we want something that's a really obvious visual indicator. So what we're going to do, which isn't the best thing to transition, but I'm actually going to do a transition of border bottom. And let's do 250 milliseconds on this and just say like an ease in. And what we'll do is on my new focus, so when it gains focus, so when somebody clicks inside of it, the border bottom width will switch from 1 pixel to, let's say, 3 pixels. So now if I click in there, you can see it grows in size. I'm actually going to make this like 150 milliseconds. I want to be pretty fast. There you go. So it's just a little visual indicator that we are in there. And the other thing I'm actually going to do as well is in my new focus placeholder, opacity is going to drop down. Opacity is going to become like 0.2. It's already lowered, but now you can see when I click in that so we have 2 visual indicators coming now. We have the placeholders disappearing a bit, and the underline is increasing to let people know that we are in there. So cool, that is good. Now, one thing you might have also noticed is that what I've done is I've put my button after my input, just because it makes a lot more sense. Say you're creating a list, you might go like my new list, and then you might hit tab and then hit enter to create it. Whereas if my button is first, if you're tabbing through, you'd select your button first and then you'd select this second, and that doesn't make much sense. Now visually, I'd much rather have this here and set it up this way, because I think visually it makes more sense, but from a markup perspective, it's broken. If you set up the button first and this second and someone's tabbing through, you're not functional. So what I want to do is come on here. If we look in this, we're in my all tasks and then it's in my form. So what I'm going to do is, I think it's all my forms actually, because I have that one and I have this one. I might cheat a little bit and just make I'm going to keep it close. I'm going to bring it up to here and say form is display flex. And then what I can do is on my new here, I can actually give this a order of 2. And it's going to switch them around because this is defaulting to 1 and that's going to the 2. So it's setting up the order of these a little bit better. Now, another thing that's bothering me is the font size here is kind of small, but this one is bigger. So I use the inherent font size on that. So what I think I'm going to leave that because it is working. And if ever we had other tasks, it would work as well. But what I'm going to do, this is my new, I'm going to do it after that. So we had that as my new, and it was list. So my new list will be a font size of, was it 1.2 I used? I think so, 1.2. To shrink that down a little bit, I might even make that a little bit smaller, 1.1. Let's see what that looks like. Whoops, I just realized both of them are getting smaller because I copied and pasted it before. So that means when I did this, create new, where's my class, new list? This should be new task here, not new list. So that one should stay, there we go. That one's staying big, but this one is nice and small. Perfect. So let's go back to my CSS. So that's looking up right. Let's go to my button now because my buttons need some serious work. I'm going to keep my buttons here with my form just because I think I like doing that. So it's BTN so button should control what all of these are looking like. We have some universal styles and we'll have some individual styles on different ones. So the first thing is my cursor should be a pointer on all of these to show that it's interactable. Font size and font weight, I'm not sure I'm going to worry about. Background though, let's set, just a quick hint, if you put background 0 instead of writing transparent, it just sort of like, it defaults it off. So the same as border 0, padding 0. We just want to get rid of a whole bunch of stuff that is on there as a default. The color we can also inherit. So there we go. The colors are working a bit better. Obviously, these colors here will get changed over after. The font size will have to be bigger. Font size, I'm going to start with 1 rem and see. We might have to go bigger than that as well. So maybe I'll just leave that off for the moment because I think they'll get individualized a little bit more. So this one here is my button list. It's my list button. So what we want to do on that is obviously the font size on that one needs to be bigger. Let's try like a 1.5 rem, and the font weight I want to make it a lot more visually strong. So I'll make it thick like that. And let's just add a little margin on the right side of it of like 0.25 em, just to nudge things over just like that. Cool. And what I want to do is I want to make it when we hover on top of it, just to add, we have the cursor, but let's make it a little bit more obvious that it is interactable. So what we can say is my button, I'm going to change this button list in a second, but hover is opacity of like 0.7. So when we hover, it drops the opacity. Now we could leave it like that, or if you want, you could come in and put a transition opacity of like 250 milliseconds, ease in, something like that. So when we go, we're just getting a nice little ease on that instead of it being super obvious. So I think that's looking pretty good, and it's looking pretty nice. Now the problem is both of these buttons are really, really similar. The main difference is the color of them, but I have the color coming through as inherit. So I think instead of button list, I'm going to put button, what should we change that to? Button create. We're going to call it a create button because it's a big plus sign. So that means in both of these. So in my button list, so button create, and then I'm going to come all the way down, and this one would be button create as well. So if we do that, and then I save my CSS file, there we go. They are both looking the same and looking pretty good. Since we're doing the buttons, I think I'll come back and do those once we've styled this, because there'll be a little bit of work to do on that. But this one's looking pretty good. I can do it, hit enter, it should work because it's in the form. I should be able to click on that and it should work. And all of that is done. So now we can move on to my main tasks here and the fun part of creating the custom checkbox. All right, so let's go and look back at my markup on how we did this. So right here we had my input, which is this here. We had the input, which is my checkbox, which I actually want to hide, because then I have my label. My label is the text, but we want to use a custom checkbox on that. So this is the fun part. So let's come in and scroll all the way down. We can come down to here, and I have my to-do list. So that's where we want to be. And let's do a few things in here. So we're in the right grid area. Let's give this a background of var, was it color light? And give it a color of var color dark. Whoops. Color dark, and see what that looks like. We're getting there. I want to add some padding, but I'm going to be using similar padding everywhere because this top part won't have anything, but I'm going to use it inside of there. So I'm actually going to create a spacer, spacer to rem. And the reason I'm doing that in here is just to show you can create locally scoped custom properties instead of always having them up in the root. Every demo you ever see will always be up here. But I do think there's uses for having ones. If this is the only place I'm ever using this spacer unit, I might as well just save it down here because it makes it easier for me to find, makes it easier for me to know what they are. So I don't think there's anything wrong with having locally scoped custom properties as well as globally scoped ones. And I actually have an article up on CSS tricks, and I'll link to that in the description below, where I go into some use cases for having these locally scoped custom properties. And the reason I'm saying that is because now, so now what I can do is on my to-do header, I can come and give this a background of, let's just do E4. I didn't create anything for this, but a nice light gray since we're on a white background. And obviously my, I think I called it list title. I should have done to-do title, would have made more sense. Margin of 0 on there, just so we have that. But what I can do now is here I can do my padding is var spacer. And you might be going, okay, that's, let's just do, what was it? Task count, margin of 0 as well. And then I had my to-do body. So where the spacer comes in handy now is on this. I can also do a padding of var spacer. And so I know this space here is the exact same space that I have here and all around, and it's all equal spacing. And if ever I wanted to change it, I can change it in one place. And look at that, it's changing in both of them all at the same time. So I know that everything is always lined up and is always working properly. So there we go. That's looking good. I want my to-do, my task count here, the font size must be, what if we did like a 1 rem? That looks all right. I also I think we'll leave it like that. That also means that my to-do header should be display flex, so that these go next to each other. Let's do an align items center, so they're lined up that way. And let's do a space, and let's do a justify content space between, so they get spread out. There we go. Fantastic. So that should work out just fine. This text align center should mean if it's a really long title, this will always just stay right in the middle. So we should be fine with that. The one thing I'll also add, just in case ever you did have a long title and to prevent these from touching, is you could definitely come through and do a margin right of like say 1em or something like that, just to make sure you always have the gap. Whoops, I put that on the wrong spot. That should be on my title. So I guess we could do 0, 1, rem 0, 0. There we go. So it just makes sure there's always a bit of a gap here and nothing is touching. So that's looking good. These actually, sorry, I'm jumping back to this side. I just realized these don't really look like they're interactable right now, and they will be. So let's come back and fix those. So yeah, to make those interactable, I'm going to come over to my index here, and let's come back up to those. Because here we had the LIs. I'm actually going to come and give them all a class just to make it a bit easier inside of my markup. So it'd be list name. We'll do, I think that makes sense. So I have my list name on all of them, and then this is still my active list that we have there. And the reason I want to do that, that's my list title. Let's go up a little bit. To-do list, new, task list. So my task list in here, let's add in list name. So we can have a cursor pointer. So the advantage there is it does now look a bit more interactable. And I think what we'll also do is my list name hover will be opacity of 0.7 or something like that. Just so when we, there's a little bit of interaction going through on those. So it, we can see what we're hovering on. I think that'll make it a little bit easier. So that's a little fix just there. Sorry about that. We can come back to this side now. All right, so here we're in my to-do body. So what I'm going to do is actually, I never gave my checkboxes a class on them. If we look, I just have my input type checkbox. What I'm going to do instead of giving them is I'm just going to say anything that has a type of checkbox. We don't actually want to see it. So we're going to say an opacity of 0 to hide it. And I'm also going to give it a position of absolute so it disappears. So by doing the position of absolute, it takes it out of the flow of the document. So we don't see them anymore. The opacity, or it takes them out of the flow so you can see everything moved over. And the opacity of 0 so we don't see them anymore. There are other ways of hiding checkboxes, but they're still tabbable this way. If we put a display of none, they're pretty much gone. It's like they don't exist, whereas now I can actually still tab through and select them and toggle them, which is useful if you want to keep that sort of functionality going. So they sort of disappeared, so that means what we want to do now is come in and create our custom checkbox. So let's come and do our custom checkbox and start making some stuff in here. So the first thing we're going to do is make this a display inline block so we can actually see it. And then let's give it a width of, 0.75em, a height of 0.75em. And actually this is a good time to do another, let's call it size. It can be 0.75em. Just because then if I got my size wrong, var is size. If I got my size wrong, I can change it in one place and I do both at once. And that's always a nice thing to do. Cursor can be pointer. And let's give these, I guess, a border. Border of 2 pixels solid current color so we can actually see them. There we go. Border radius of 50%. So we have our circle. There we go. So we're sort of getting somewhere with it. The other thing here is I'm going to do my task label. So this is the label. If you remember, let's go look at my markup. Here I have a task, and then inside of this task, I have my input, which is my checkbox, which is now vanished, and then we have the label itself. And my label itself has the span, and it has the text in there. So the reason I want to come in here is I actually want to do a display of flex on these, and then I can do an align items center, so it should line things up a little bit nicer. I think what it will also add here, let's do a margin left margin right of our size. So we can add the space that we want on that. And the other thing, I want this little, let's go back to the finished version. We want these little gray lines that are going to be coming through on that. So let's add those in because that is on my label here. So we want my task label, but then on this we can put in we can put in an after. So on that, I'm going to do, if you don't know about pseudo-elements, I do have a video on that as well. I have done lots of videos. Position absolute, which also means this should be position relative. So if you're not sure about positioning, I have a video on that. Holy moly, I've covered a lot of stuff over these days. Okay, cool. Position absolute. Let's give it a right of 0, a left of 0, a top, I don't know yet. Let's just give it a height of like 2 pixels and see what we have. It needs a background too, right? Background can be current color so we can see it. It should be a black line. There we go. So my top, let's say top, what if I did top, no, let's do bottom. Bottom 0. And that's good, but we want to move it down. So let's say negative 50%. That could work, but that just means these will have to do a margin bottom of, let's start with 2M and see what happens. A bit too big, 1.5. All right, there we go. So that is looking not too bad, but I don't want them to be there. The current color is making it really, really, really stand out. So I'm going to also come in here and just give this an opacity of like 0.1. And I'm going to drop this height down to 1. There you go. That looks pretty good. Now what we want to be able to do is actually, we want to hover on these, right? So let's come back to our custom checkbox. And what we want this to like hover, like if we come here, anywhere we go, we want that to actually grow. So on my custom checkbox, let's give this a transform scale of 1. So we want it to be the normal size, but we'll transition that. Transform over like 200 milliseconds, ease in, out. And then what we want is when we have our task, so the whole task, anything inside of our task, when we hover, we want the custom checkbox transform scale 1.1. We don't want it to grow a lot. But now when we go on top, did I set that up well? There we go, 1.2, it's growing enough. So now it should be anytime we go on a task, so when we hover on top of any of them, so we hover anywhere on the parent. So let's go look here again. Anytime I hover on this parent, anything in it, it will highlight the whole thing. Because I want to say that anything here is clickable. I don't want only these to be considered clickable. I want anything here. So that's sort of just this like visual clue that anything I'm coming on to is clickable. Awesome. So actually, I put the cursor on that. Maybe we'll change the cursor for the entire list item or the whole task and give it the cursor just to say that this whole area is clickable. Now another thing, another time, so that is good. We want that to be able to grow like that. And you know what? I'm actually going to change the color of this too. Let's do color becomes var primary. So it's really like it's also going to become blue at the same time. Now I don't only want this to happen here. There's another time I want this to happen is when we go on one of our original checkboxes. So I'm going to say when we have our type checkbox is focused. So when we focus on a checkbox, I'm going to have to think here for a second. The label that is so the plus combinator here is saying a label that is next to the checkbox. So or that's the sibling of. So we have my input. So the label that comes directly after it, our custom checkbox that's inside of that. So we have our label and then our custom checkbox that's inside of that. So now if I hover on top, you can see that it's actually doing it. But if I tab through, it's also going through and doing it. I'll shift tab to go backwards through there. So you can see the tab or the hover are both doing the same type of thing. So that's pretty cool. And because I can actually click on this and it's checked that box off. So when I push, or it's selected, when I click on this, because my label is set up, so because my label here has the for this, that checkbox has become active. So now if I start tabbing or reverse tabbing, it is going through those and it's highlighting what we want it to. So that's really, really cool. But now we also want to do something very, very similar. So let's copy all that and bring it down here, but I don't want focus. I want it when we gain, when it's checked. So if our checkbox actually gets checked, we want to do something to our custom checkbox that we created here. We want it to get like that blue thing in there, right? So let's first start off by doing just a background on here of var color primary. So now if I click on that, there we go. You can see I had already clicked in a few of them. So what's happening is when we click in it, it's filling up with blue. The problem is the border on there, so let's fix the border. Border will be also var color primary. So the whole thing fills in like that. So if you like that and you just want to leave it like that, so it's staying big. When I click, it's staying big because it's also selected, right? So we're also focusing, but as soon as I move off to something else, it's losing that focus. So if you like just that bullet point like that, you can keep it, but I find it's not super clear. So the way we can fix this, and this is interesting, is we can use a box shadow. So I'm sure you've used box shadows before. So if you do it as, let's just say we do 0, 0, 10 pixels. So we have a blur on there, it'd be black by default. But what we can actually do is do an inset shadow. So inset. So the shadow's coming onto the inside of it. So you can see it actually made that a lot darker. So let's just make it 2 pixels maybe instead. But what if we make this white? And then that white is sort of coming in on the inside of the border a little bit. So I'm going to make this a little bit bigger, but I don't want a blur actually. If we have a blur, it doesn't make it super obvious. So if we do, actually let's move it back to here. It's defaulting to black so you can see it. Now, right now I have a blur of 10 pixels on there, but if I add in another 10 here, what it's doing is it's adding a spread. So it's saying don't start blurring until you've gotten past 10 pixels and then start this blur. Hey, that's interesting that the color of it changes. So what I'm actually going to do is, what if we do that as 0, you sort of get this secondary border on it. So that's kind of cool, right? You get a second border almost for free. But what I'm going to do here is I'm going to change this, instead of being like that, let's make it a bit smaller. So let's try like 3 pixels. So we get a secondary border. But I'm going to do inset at the beginning here. And what that's going to do is it's actually going to pull that to the inside instead of the outside. So what we can do is, instead of just using black, it looks weird, I'm going to make it white. Oh, I should have made this border color and not border color. So we can keep our border. There we go. So actually, and maybe this should be 2 instead of 3. You can play with the size and what you want it to be. So now we should be able to click, and when we click on and off, it looks like it's sort of toggling that. And then when we come off, the size of it changes. There we go. It's working like a charm. Super cool, right? So it's this custom checkbox that is actually checking the real checkbox. Our real checkbox is in the background. It's when it, and we know it's working because this is only getting this custom styling on it when the real checkbox is checked. So for 100%, it's working. Now, another thing that we want to do is we want that like cross out animation thing going on. So for that, we do need to do a few different things on this one. So what we're going to do is, once again, we're going to have our, I'm going to grab this, our friend here, and let's just start with our label. And the opacity on this can drop to like a 0.5 or something like that, because that'd be a nice visual clue that we've sort of finished with that. So we could leave it like that, but I sort of like this, like we're going to cross it off at the same time. So it not only is that happening, but it's being crossed off. So I want to actually use a custom, a pseudo-element on this. And you might remember we already set one up. And I just realized when I created this, I made a bit of a mistake because I put this on there, and we could create a second one, but the problem is it's always going to cross off too much because it's going to be stretching this whole thing. So I actually think I'm going to take this bottom, I'm going to change this bottom to a 0. And I'm going to put this after directly on the task itself, which actually makes a bit more sense anyway, which does mean on here I just want to have a task of position relative. Sorry about this. So we get those lines that are coming back in, and the bottom, I guess, can still be what I actually had it at, which was negative 0.5 em. There we go. Okay, so that can stay the same. So I'm just putting my position relative on here, and then my task of the pseudo element, I'm just switching it to be on task itself instead of being on the label. Because what I want to do is on the tasks label, I'm going to bring it down here for a very specific reason. So task label after. So once again, we do need our content of that. We need a position absolute. I'm going to do a left of 0 and a right of 0. We're going to give it a height of, say, 3 pixels to start with, and a background of current color so we can actually see it. There we go. So that's our cross off. Now I don't want it to go all the way to the side here. I actually want it to stop, but I want it to stop according to the length of the text itself. And that can be tricky, but what it means I'm actually going to do, which is something I almost never ever do, but where I did my label here and I did display flex, flex by default is going to be 100% width, but we actually have flex inline, which I almost never use. This is one of the only times I've ever used this, but it means it sort of becomes an inline element, which will work great, but it also is sort of breaking things a little bit because I can't give it a margin bottom now. So we can give that directly and just move that over to here. There we go. We've spaced things back out. Super. So by doing the inline on this, you can see the line is actually keeping to the right length. We just want to position things a little better. So left is good, right is good. Let's just do a top of 50%. There we go. Pretty much. Or actually, my height is 3 pixels. So if you really wanted to be perfect here, we could do a calc of 50% minus 1.5 pixels, or it'd be plus. There we go, minus. That should work. Now one problem is this side is actually pretty good, but on the left side, it's completely off, right? Like we want this to line up over here. So I want to put my left, and I actually want my left to be, let's just try 2em, and it might work actually. We'll go with 1.5, and there we go. So there, it's lining up where we need it to. Cool. The only problem is we don't always want to see this, right? So what I'm actually going to do is now put in a transform scale. I only want to do a scale X of 0. And what we want now is we're going to grab all of this again. And this is why I kept this down here. Checked my label after. So we just have to come and change this now to a transform scale X of 1. And it's there. So when I click, you can see it goes through and it crosses it off, which is awesome. But the problem is we want to animate that. So what we can do is we can do a transition of transform, let's say 300 milliseconds, ease in, out. And let's check it out now. So it's working, it's crossing it out. Actually, this is going to be a lot faster. Let's do like 150. So it is crossing it out, but it's crossing it out from the middle. So we can do a transform origin and say left. And now it's going to shoot from the left. But then when you go that way, it's going to go back where it came from. And it's a lot cooler when it goes this way and then it shoots the other way. So for that, what we want to do is put a right on here and put the left on this side, left. So when I click, it goes that way, and when I click off, it scratches off the other direction. So I think that looks a little bit more fun to do it that way. Like that. So there we go. You can see that is working fantastically, and it looks really good. Cool. Everything is looking fantastic. The two things we want to fix are these to bring them underneath here, and there's this problem that's coming up here, and I don't know why that alignment is off, because it should be lining up properly. So I'm going to do an inspect on this to find out what it is. And let's see what might be causing that space. Why do I have a margin bottom on there? Margin. Oh, this is where my, so you can see here, this is coming from a task, and that's because these are tasks, and I called that new task. If we look back at the markup, so each one of these divs was a task, but then I was getting smart with my class names, and I said I don't usually name stuff like this. And you can see it has run into a bit of a problem because of that. That was silly of me. But I do want to keep a lot of the other properties that happen to be on there. So I think it's not really the way I like to work. And again, I don't think I would use this naming convention in the real world. But I do know up higher, where was it? I did my new list. So here, I'm just going to do a new task. And we'll do a margin bottom of 0. So there we go, that fixed that. And while we're here, I'd sort of want this button to be a different color. So that's my new task. Button create. Because these are both button create, and I use the color inherit to get it. So this is where we could use another class name, create task type of thing. But that would cause more problems because then we'd give it the task name again if I'm sticking with this bit of a strange naming convention. I could also say inside of my new task creator, which I don't think I had anywhere. So I'm going to bring that. All of this stuff is in my custom checkbox, task, to do. We're all inside of here. So was it task or new task creator? Or no, that's not right. Anyway, I'll move this in a second. So if I had my new task creator and then my create, I could do color is var color primary. And I get that the blue color on there instead. I just think it stands out a little more and makes it a bit more obvious what that is for. Now, these two down here, we're almost done. It was a longer video than I anticipated, but that's all right. I think it's a fun one where we did lots of stuff you can learn from, so it's all worth it. Delete stuff is what we'd called that. Nice name. And let's do a display of flex on there. And the reason I want to do this is so I can do a justify content. I could do a space between, which you tend to see a lot, so that would spread them all the way to one side and the other, though, which I don't really want to do. Usually see space around, but there's also space evenly, which I think has pretty good browser support now. And that fixes the problem that space around had, because what space around does is it makes this space equal to, like, it's a gap here, here, and here, but see, this is a really long one and this is a really short one. So it actually can make things unbalanced, whereas space evenly will just balance things out a little better. It centers them within the space, so some of the spaces might be bigger or smaller, but that's all good. It ends up working, I find, a lot better than space around it does. But the other thing I want to do is I'm going to give this a position of absolute. So I can move it a little bit. We'll have to give it a width of 100% to fix that problem. And a left of 0, just to make sure it is starting on the left side properly. Not what I anticipated. Delete stuff. So delete stuff is inside. What's the parent of delete stuff? Delete stuff's parent is my to-do body. So let's go back. I think it's just my to-do body. We'll give this a position relative to keep. There we go. That looks a little better, right? I think so. And then, so what we're doing there when we do position relative on that, before it was being positioned according to the body, or actually probably, I guess the body, or maybe even the grid areas that are on there or something like that. Not sure exactly, but what I want to do is just make sure the parent here is what is positioning, or what it's getting positioned absolutely inside of. So that's why that fixes that problem. We want to move it down. So my top, no, not top, bottom. The reason you don't want to use top is if I did like a top 0 or even whatever, you're aiming always from here, the top of the body here, which I don't want to be doing because that just makes it really hard to know how far to push it down. So bottom, and I don't want it to be 0 because it'd be right there. So we can do like a negative, how much? 50 pixels. It's probably a bit too much. 25. 35. And it should be nice and perfect. Let's change the color in here. Color is var color light, and it's a little too in your face. Can I change the font weight on here, or is it not going to work? Font weight 700? I didn't think so, because those are my buttons that are inside of there. And what did we call those buttons? button delete. That makes it a little easier. So I'll move this up in a second. Button delete. I'll move that up with all my other buttons in a minute. But let's just say font weight is 700 because it's and letter spacing. We'll try 1 pixel and let's see what that looks like. Or let's change. Yeah, we'll do an opacity. Opacity of like 0.8, 0.7, and I'll make the font size a little bigger. Font size of like 1. What if I just did 1 rem even? I'm actually going to take off these two maybe and go back. I think I'm going to leave it like that. But what I do want to do is also have my hover state for this. So for that, it's the only time we're going to use one of the custom properties that I set up, hover, and we'll change the color to var color warning. So now it darkens the whole thing up. And I guess if we really wanted to, we could also do a transition color 200 milliseconds. I'm not putting an ease on there. We don't have to. I don't remember what the default is. I think it's an ease in by default. So let's move this button up to be with the other buttons. Button create hover. So we can put it right here. And a few little finishing touches. I want to increase the padding a little here because it's a little tight on that. So that's my new task. Padding. We can do this for both of them actually. So let's just come up here. New task, and my new list will get a padding of like 0.25 em, and I think that'll just make it look a little bit nicer. And I want the placeholder on here. That's the focus, I think. Oh, I could just do new. Silly me. So let's just grab this. We'll do here. Did I do padding? No, I never put any padding. So let's put that padding there. We don't need it on that. Should be exactly the same. It looks exactly the same. Good. And then the border is good. Transition is good. I'm just going to change the new placeholder. I'm going to just do an opacity of like 0.5 maybe. Is that what it already was? It already was 0.5. Huh, didn't know that. What if we brought that up? 7? I just want to see what it looks like. That's a little too much. We'll do like a 0.3 and then maybe it drops down to like a 0.15. So it's already kind of subtle. This one I like. This one might be a bit too light, but I think it's okay. We'll go up to a 0.4 just to make it a little bit more obvious when it changes. And make it a little easier to see as well. I realize that contrast ratio is really low. I'd definitely get a warning on that. So that is it for my part on this video. Make sure you check out Kyle's video to see how we can actually make this thing work, because that's the real fun part of all of this, right? So yeah, thank you very much for watching. I really do hope you enjoyed it. I hope you enjoyed Kyle's video just as much. The link for that is in the description below. A massive thank you to my patrons for helping support everything I do here on my channel. I wouldn't be able to do it without you guys. If you're new here and you enjoyed this video, whether you're coming from Kyle's channel or if you just managed to find this on your own, that's really awesome. If you liked what you saw and you haven't yet subscribed, please consider subscribing. And until next week, please don't forget to make your corner of the internet just a little bit more awesome.